Day 1. The beginning of solitude. I had always longed for a peaceful retreat, a place where I could disconnect from the constant noise of the world. That summer, I decided to take a solo trip into the heart of an old, untamed forest. With my backpack slung over my shoulders, I ventured deep into the woods, following an unmarked path. After miles of walking, I stumbled upon a clearing just before sunset. In the middle of that open space stood an old, abandoned cabin. Its wooden exterior was worn down, the windows clouded with dust, and the roof slightly caved in at one corner. Still, it felt like the perfect place to stay the night. As darkness fell, I set up a small fire outside. The air was eerily silent, with only the occasional rustle of leaves. A soft, cool breeze passed through the trees, sending a strange shiver down my spine. The trees around me swayed slightly, as if whispering secrets. I dismissed it as fatigue from the long journey and went inside to sleep on the dusty, wooden floor. Day 2. The cabin's charm. The morning sun pierced through the cracks of the cabin, waking me up. I stepped outside, stretching, as I took in the beauty of the forest. Birds chirped in the distance, and the air smelled fresh, with the scent of pine. This place was peaceful, and I decided I would spend my entire vacation here. Exploring the area, I found a small lake nearby, its water so clear I could see the pebbles beneath. The cabin, despite its abandoned state, felt oddly welcoming. I swept away the dust, arranged my things neatly, and claimed the space as my own temporary home. As evening approached, I lit another fire outside, enjoying the tranquility, but the peace was short-lived. As I sat there, I heard something, faint knocking. It was coming from inside the cabin. Day 3. The first signs. I barely slept the night before, my mind playing tricks on me. The knocking had been soft but persistent, coming from the inside of the cabin while I sat outside. When I gathered enough courage to investigate, there was nothing. The door was slightly ajar, swaying with the wind, but nothing seemed out of place. The next day, I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was just the old wood settling. But that night, the knocking returned. This time, it was louder. 3 sharp raps against the wooden walls. My heart pounded as I sat frozen on my makeshift bed. The air around me felt thick, suffocating. Then, I heard something worse. A faint, sorrowful weeping. It echoed through the cabin, coming from the corner where an old rocking chair sat. The chair creaked back and forth on its own, and the sound sent a chill through my bones. The cries were soft, like a whisper carried on the wind, but they carried a deep sorrow that made my skin crawl. Day 4. The ghostly presence. The next morning, I stepped outside, desperate for the warmth of the sun. The cabin no longer felt like a peaceful retreat. It felt like a prison. I debated leaving, but something about the place held me there, an inexplicable pull I couldn't ignore. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a presence. It was as if someone stood in the shadows, watching me. My breath hitched when I saw movement in the dark. A pale figure peered at me from the corner of the room, half of its face hidden in the shadows. Its eyes were hollow, devoid of light. I couldn't move. The moment I blinked, it was gone. Then came the knocking again. This time, it was frantic, desperate. I clutched my blanket, beads of sweat forming on my forehead. My fear intensified when I realized the knocking wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from the ceiling. Day 5. The crawling horror. I had barely gotten any sleep. The feeling of being watched lingered throughout the day. The air inside the cabin was cold, despite the summer heat outside. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer, twisting unnaturally as the sun dipped below the horizon. As night fell, I sat on the floor, hugging my knees. The wind howled through the trees, but I was focused on the silence inside the cabin. Then, a scraping sound came from above. I tilted my head up, and my breath caught in my throat. A figure was crawling across the ceiling. It moved unnaturally, its limbs bending in ways they shouldn't. Its long, tangled hair hung down, swaying as it twisted its head to look at me. Empty, hollow eyes bore into mine, and then it smiled. I screamed and bolted out of the cabin, running into the dark forest. But the sounds followed me. Soft whispers, the crying, the knocking. The wind carried hushed voices, calling my name. I collapsed by the lake, shaking. I wanted to leave, but the night was too dark, and the forest too vast. Day 6. The Woman's Lament. I spent the day gathering my things, determined to leave the moment the sun set. But as evening approached, I found myself unable to move. It was as if something was keeping me there. Then I heard her voice. "Stay, please, stay." It was soft, sorrowful. It came from behind me. Slowly, I turned. There she stood, a woman in tattered white, her head tilted unnaturally to the side. But the most horrifying part, she was holding her own severed head in her hands. Her mouth moved, but the voice came from the head she carried. "Don't leave me alone." I couldn't take it anymore. I collapsed to my knees, squeezing my eyes shut, praying. I chanted every prayer I knew, my voice shaking. The air around me grew colder, and then silence. Day 7. The Final Haunting. The moment the sun rose, I ran. I didn't pack, didn't look back. I just ran. The forest felt endless, but my desperation pushed me forward. As I neared the main road, I heard it one last time. The knocking. 3 soft taps, as if saying goodbye. I reached my car and sped away, never once looking into the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see if she was watching. I never spoke of that place again, never returned, but sometimes, late at night, I hear it. 3 knocks at my bedroom door.